Assalamu alaikum. I hope so you are doing fine. I'm Dr. Muhammad Ali Rabbani and we are going to continue with the next segment of our lecture on spinal cord, that is the intersegmental tracts. Okay, what are the intersegmental tracts, also known as propriospinal tracts? As the name indicates, these are the tracts that starts in the spinal cord and ends within the spinal cord. They may be as short as entering and exiting in the same segment of the spinal cord, and they may go all the way from one end of the spinal cord to the other one. But the key thing is that they remain within the spinal cord. So they originate and end within the spinal cord. That's the major thing that is related to it. Or to be more specific, we are going to be discussing the reflexes that are in the spinal cord. So let us move further. I'm putting in that so that just keep. So the particularly important reflexes that we are going to discuss in this segment of the video are myotatic muscle stretch reflex, inverse muscle stretch reflex, flexor withdrawal reflex, crossed-extensor reflex, and reciprocal inhibition we will discuss along with these. So before going into that, let us discuss what are the major sensory organs that are responsible for reflexes. So this is a picture taken from USMLE Kaplan notes, and the sensory organs are two major ones that we are going to discuss is the length, muscle spindle, the muscle spindle, and Golgi tendon organ. Muscle spindle is shown right here. These are basically specialized muscle fibers called intrafusal fibers. These are the specialized fibers that are present embedded within the muscle mass, and they are stimulated by muscle stretch. As the muscle lengthens, they become activated and start firing, and they are present within the muscle bundle, and these are called intrafusal fibers. The second are the Golgi tendon organs. These are not categorically shown here, but these are present here in the tendons. So they don't respond to the change in length, they respond to the change in tension. As the muscle contracts more forcefully, the tension increases and the firing increases. You can see that if you're holding, you can see that the example can be any weight in your hand. If I am having one glass of water in my hand, it has a particular tension in this tendon. As this glass is filled, the muscle tension will increase. So that the tension, as the tension increases, the firing, the sensation of the Golgi tendon organ, it increases. And then there are receptors in the skin that are responding in these reflexes that we will see. Then there are types of motor fibers. There is the alpha motor fibers, and then there is a gamma motor fibers. So what are the alpha motor fibers? These alpha motor fibers, let me move to another screen. So let's say here is the muscle. These muscle has the fibers. These are the muscle that are bringing about all the contractions. These are the extrafusal fibers. Okay. Then there are fibers. Let me show you here. So these fibers, these are extrafusal fiber. These are the muscles that are responsible for muscle contraction. And then these are the muscle fibers that are present inside and the muscle spindles. These fibers, these are, as you have guessed it, these are the infrafusal fibers. As the muscle contracts, the as the muscle contracts, the muscle will shorten. Let's say the biceps contracts like this, the biceps muscle will shorten. However, when the antagonist muscle contracts, the muscle will passively lengthen. Like the triceps contract, the biceps will lengthen. When the triceps contract, the biceps will lengthen, the extrafusal fiber will be passively stretched, and intrafusal fibers will be passively stretched. And these are the one, the intrafusal fibers will be the one that will sense the lengthening. They only sense the increase in length. Okay. Now, this increase in length that is carried by sensory fibers, that's carried by sensory fibers all the way to CNS, and that is responsible for reflex activity and other functions. So, what are the different motor fibers that are responsible? So, there are two. One, then there is first there is alpha motor neurons. Then there is alpha motor neurons. These are going to exclusively make synapses with these extrafusal fibers. They are not making any connections with the intrafusal fiber. So these alpha motor neurons, what do do when they act on it? They will make these fibers. They will make the muscles contract muscles. They will make the muscles contract and muscle length shortens. Muscle will contract, muscle length will shorten. What about the extrafusal fibers? What about the intrafusal fibers now? The intrafusal fibers, again, they are gamma motor neurons and they are going to make the intrafusal fiber contract. So they are going to supply these muscle fibers. So let's say these are going to contract intrafusal. So intrafusal, it's not large enough to contract the muscle in itself. So what is its importance now? Let me give by an example. For example, in this example, a muscle is at rest. If the tricep contracts and muscle lengthens, let's say muscle lengthens by 10%, the intrafusal fibers is stretched by 10%, it responds. And 10% not an actual or logical value, but just giving you an example. But when gamma motor neurons have activated intrafusal fibers, the intrafusal fibers become shortened and they are already in 10%. So they will behave like the muscle is stretched. So in other words, as the muscle spindle fibers, the intrafusal fiber contract, they feel themselves that already they are stretched and they will want the extrafusal fiber to be contracted and shortened in length to the same length. So the contraction of the intrafusal fiber is enhancing their sensitivity. So for this single sentence, I built up this whole story. So alpha motor neurons are going to supply the extrafusal fibers only, leading to the contraction of the motor unit. By the way, motor unit was the all the muscle fibers that are supplied by a single axon. In gamma motor neurons supply the intrafusal fiber, the muscle spindle fibers, and they lead to the contraction of those cells. And after the contraction, that muscle, these cells will feel themselves already shorter than the extrafusal fiber. They will feel themselves already in a state of contraction, so are now behaving as more sensitive. So gamma motor neurons is increasing the sensitivity of the muscle spindles. Now, what is a reflex arc? Reflex arc are basically the involuntary response to the stimuli whose circuitry lies at the local level within the spinal cord. So, reflex arc, basically simplest form of reflex arc, consists of these four components. There should be a receptor organ. In this case, there is a muscle. In this case, there is a muscle uh, spindle. This is the receptor. There will be a nerve fiber that will carry the signal from this receptor. This is the I'm sorry. This is the muscle spindle. There will be an axon. There will be a nerve that will carry this sensory signal. This is the afferent sensory neuron. that will go up. It will have cell body in dorsal root ganglion, will go all the way into the spinal cord. Of course, this signal will go up in the tract, but the part we are concerned with is the one that is going down here, and it will synapse with this alpha motor neuron, the efferent neuron. That is the third component. The efferent motor neuron will take the signal away from the spinal cord to the muscle, and here it will have an influence of the muscle itself, and the muscle will contract. So these are the four responses. So what happens when you strike the tendon of quadriceps femoris with a hammer? The muscle stretches momentarily, the muscle spindle detects it, fires, signals is carried through afferent fibers, goes through dorsal root, dorsal horn, synapses with the alpha motor neuron. The signal travels through alpha motor neuron until it reaches the extrafusal fiber, and that leads to the contraction of muscle. That is why when you strike a hammer to the patellar tendon, the muscle contracts and your knee jerk is front. Apart from this simple reflex, I don't want to go into the detail, but all the other tracts, the corticospinal tract, the rubrospinal tract, the reticulospinal tract, the vestibulospinal tract, these are having influence on this reflex. And through directly or indirectly having this influence on this reflex, they control their movements. For example, when you strike this is the reflex pathway, the neuromuscular spindle, the sensory neurons, this point of synapse, this alpha motor neuron, and then motor end plate. So this is a reflex arc that is going on. The other fibers, the upcoming the down fibers from the upper tract, they may influences the reflexes. The going reflexes like this, these reflexes may tell this point to respond less sensitivity. For example, the upcoming tract may tell this point don't respond to the reflex. In most of the cases, these reflexes have an inhibitory control, like an adult supervision of a child playing ahead and going wildly about. The upper tracts, they are telling this reflex to calm down. A good example is the urinary reflex. It's a simple reflex like that. Bladder stretches, the receptors fixate, sensory nerves come, it ends on the motor neurons that lead to the contraction of bladder. But what happens is that the upper motor neurons that are coming into that, they repress this reflex. They repress this reflex through inhibitory neurons as shown right here, and they reflex this reflex so that the reflex does not trigger automatically until the upper motor neuron, the higher center, releases it. And that is why the young children, those who have not learned the control of the upper motor neurons, and the people who have their spinal cords cut above the levels, then in those cases the spinal cord reflexes, they cannot control their urination because they cannot influence inhibitory influence. So in most of the cases, as you will see along in the lesions, the supraspinal, the upper motor neuron lesions will lead to hyperreflexia. Purely speaking, corticospinal tract does not inhibit reflexes, but usually the injury of the corticospinal tract is along with other tract injuries, and the other tracts apart from corticospinal tract, the other non-pyramidal tracts, those have a very significant influence on reducing the reflex activity. So their lesion will lead to hyperreflexia. Muscle stretch reflex. It monitors the muscle length, and what happens is that primary mechanism for when the muscle is lengthened due to a hammer or anything else, the muscle lengthens, and muscle lengthening will activate muscle spindle, and the signal is carried through alpha 1A fiber to dorsal root ganglion, dorsal root. It reaches the spinal cord. It exhibits a positive influence on the alpha motor neuron and lower motor neuron. They influence the muscle, that the very same muscle, the extensor muscles, and that lead to contraction of that muscle, that the muscle stretch reflex. we visibly see that when we do the hammer test, but it is constantly working on it, and it is maintaining the muscle tone. Let me give an example. I am sitting up straight right now. My muscles of back are continuous in a partial state of contraction. That is the muscle tone that is keeping me upright. If that tone was not there, I would drop. So that tone is constantly maintained. How? As any muscle becomes relaxed, it stops contracting, muscle lengthen, reflex goes, muscle contract, lengthen goes, lengthen goes, lengthen goes. So there is constantly reflex is going on that is maintaining the muscle at a particular state of contraction. You can see your eyelids are open, your neck is straight, your back is straight. I'm putting my hands up. So all of these things have to maintain, they have to maintain a certain stage of contraction, and that is continuously going through the cycle of muscle stretch reflex. As any part of the muscle becomes a little relaxed, the muscle's little lengthening occurs, it bring that muscles back on its position through the contraction. So that is myotatic muscle reflex. That is how the muscle tone is maintained. That is how your body is toned. It is a monosynaptic reflex. There is only one synapse and it remains on the same side. This is an ipsilateral reflex. And do you remember that the gamma motor neuron, what was their function? The gamma motor neurons, they were increasing the sensitivity of muscle spindle. So when the gamma motor neurons are firing above high, then the muscle spindle will become more sensitive, and they will respond more and more to the any smaller changes. So the muscle tone will be increased, the reflex activity will be increased. Then there is inverse muscle stretch reflex that occurs simultaneously when the muscle stretch reflex is occurring. That is also called Golgi tendon reflex. In this particular example, sorry, let me come back again. Inverse muscle stretch reflex is the muscle stretch reflex was the response to the high length. The inverse muscle stretch reflex is a response to high tension, the Golgi tendon reflex. It is shown in this part of the picture. When the and you're doing any physical work, you're constantly pushing against any particular pressure or anything, the muscle tension will go on increasing. The muscle tension will go on increasing and increasing, and it will lead to the increased firing of the Golgi tendon organs. They are in turn Golgi tendon organs, and Golgi tendon organs, through this signal, it will go through 1 alpha fibers, and it not directly synapse with the lower motor neuron, it synapse with the lower motor neuron through an inhibitory intermediary neuron, interneuron, or internuncial neuron. It through that neuron it inhibits the lower motor neuron. So what happens is that if the tension increases, then the signal will go. This inhibitory neuron will activate and it will deactivate lower motor neuron. So ultimately, increasing ultimately increasing tension will increasing tension will inactivate the muscle. Increasing tension will inactivate the muscle. So that is the ultimate role. So that is the inverse muscle stretch reflex. It is an inhibitory, it is ipsilateral, and it is polysynaptic because it has at least there are two synapses. And this is the one that leads to your muscles going relaxed. For example, if you have a very large tray of food on your hand and you're moving along, and then you get tired, and then you suddenly drop that tray, because that Golgi tendon reflex will lead you to relax those muscles. When you're doing, you're carrying that tray away, you're actually consciously inhibiting Golgi tendon reflex so that you don't lose that trait. And that Golgi, this sudden give away, this is very prominent in upper motor type neuron type lesions. When you try to flex a person's wrist, and when it resists, then suddenly goes like this, because the Golgi tendon reflex is exaggerated in the persons with the upper motor neuron type also. Then there is flexor withdrawal. Flexor withdrawal, it is the case where you you sustain a nauseous, a painful and unpleasant stimulus on skin, on finger. It can be a hot object, it can be a very sharp object, and after that you just want to remove the limb from that. You just want to increase the distance of the limb from that stimulus, and so you withdraw your legs from that. So that is called withdrawal reflex, flexor withdrawal. And try from any extended position, try to pull your limbs back. Your arm will, elbow will flex, your hip will, your shoulder will flex. Try to put up your legs like this. Your knee will flex, your hip will flex. To pull away the hand or foot, you have to flex the muscle. So this is called flexor withdrawal. So the sensory signal carried from the receptor side all the way to the polysynaptically, it activates the flexor muscles. And for the flexor muscles to effectively contract, you have to inhibit the extensor muscles or the antagonist muscles, and that is done by that. So this is called reciprocal innervation, reciprocal inhibition, that the extensor muscles at the same time are relaxed. Extensors are relaxed. And if you did not notice before, you can notice now. In even the muscle stretch reflex, there was reciprocal inhibition, innervation, that when triceps was contracted, the when the hamstring was relaxed, was inhibited. So this is called reciprocal innervation. Then related to this is crossed extensor reflex. Whenever you are involuntarily flexing up limb, in this case lower limb, the nature has designed the system in such a way that your opposite leg that is planted safely, it stiffens, it straightens itself. For example, if you suddenly withdraw one leg, your other leg must be ready to extend itself to support the body, otherwise you would fall down. Similarly, when you suddenly pull the hand before, your other hand should be looking for a support backward so that you don't fall off. So when the affected limb is withdrawing with the flexion, the contralateral limb, it is extending. So this is called crossed extensor reflex, that on the crossed side, on the opposite side, the extensors will be facilitated and flexors will be inhibited. So this was a very basic overview of the spinal reflexes that were occurring. So thank you so much. That was propriospinal reflexes. These are the spinal reflexes that we had to discuss. If you have any questions, suggestions, and feedback, please let me know. And then we'll move on to the last segment of the spinal cord. That next we are going to discuss the lesions of the spinal cord. Please stay tuned for the next video. Thank you so much. See you in the next video. Allah Hafiz.